The sound echoes through the marble hallway. A slap. Hard. Final. You will not speak to Miss Ruby that way. The 12-year-old boy stands frozen, his cheek burning red. His father, one of the wealthiest men in Connecticut, towers over him, trembling with rage. But it's not the slap that changes everything. It's what happens next. The black woman in the simple gray uniform steps forward. Her voice is quiet, but it cuts through the tension like steel. Mr. Whitmore, that child is hurting. Punishing him won't heal what's broken inside. And in that moment, everything this family thought they knew about themselves was about to crumble. Greenwich, Connecticut, 1987. The Whitmore estate sprawls across 47 acres of perfectly manicured lawns. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast rainbows on walls lined with portraits of dead ancestors who built their fortune on railroad steel and human sweat. But money can't buy what this family desperately needs. Meet Jonathan Whitmore Jr., 12 years old. Son of a media mogul worth $200 million. And failing at everything that matters. 3 private schools in 2 years. Each one more expensive than the last. Each expulsion more humiliating than the previous. The boy can't read above a 2nd grade level. Can't sit still for more than 5 minutes. Can't connect with a single human being on this earth. His father, Jonathan Sr., sees only failure. His mother, Catherine, sees only pills. The kind that keep her floating through garden parties and charity galas. The staff whispers in corners. Another tutor resigned yesterday. The 4th one this month. The boy is impossible, they say. Broken. But they don't know what's coming. They don't know about Ruby Washington. What happened next will leave you stunned. But before we get there, make sure you subscribe to Black Nation, so you never miss stories that shake the soul. Ruby Washington stepped off the Metro-North train carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases and a prayer. 53 years old. Widow. Mother of 4 grown children who escaped the projects and made something of themselves. She'd cleaned houses for 30 years. Raised other people's children while her own waited at home. Scrubbed floors that cost more than her yearly rent. But Ruby had something those other maids didn't have. A teaching degree from Spelman College, earned nights and weekends over 8 years while working 2 jobs. The degree she never got to use because no white school in Alabama would hire a black woman in 1965. And by the time the laws changed, life had already chosen her path. Mrs. Washington, the employment agency had told her, the Whitmores need someone special. The boy is challenging. Challenging. The word wealthy people use when they don't want to say broken. Ruby arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were changing, painting the Connecticut hills in shades of gold and crimson. The head butler, an elderly white man named Charles, met her at the service entrance. Few ground rules, he said, not looking her in the eye. Stay in the staff quarters. Don't speak unless spoken to. And whatever you do, don't try to fix the boy. Better people than you have tried. Ruby nodded. But behind her calm expression, something flickered. She'd been underestimated before. The first time she saw Jonathan Jr., he was locked in his room, screaming. Through the heavy oak door, she could hear furniture being thrown. Books hitting walls. A child's voice, hoarse from crying, shouting words that would make a sailor blush. He's been like that for 3 hours, Charles said with disgust. Ever since his tutor quit this morning. Ruby set down her cleaning supplies. Why don't you go tend to other business, she said quietly. I'll handle this. Charles laughed. Actually laughed. Lady, that boy has broken 3 grown men this year. One of them was a former Marine. You think you're going to. But Ruby was already walking toward the door. She didn't knock. Didn't announce herself. Just sat down on the floor outside his room, her back against the wall, and began to hum. An old spiritual her grandmother used to sing during the worst days of the Depression. Precious Lord, take my hand. The throwing stopped first. Then the cursing. Finally, the crying. 20 minutes later, the door cracked open. A pair of blue eyes, red-rimmed and suspicious, peered out. Who are you? Jonathan Jr. whispered. I'm Ruby, she said simply. And I'm here to help. And that's when everything changed. But this was only the beginning of a story that would expose the ugly truth about American privilege and the healing power of someone who refused to give up. Ruby didn't try to teach Jonathan immediately. That first week, she simply observed. She watched him struggle to read his homework, the words swimming on the page like angry insects. She watched him sit alone at dinner while his parents discussed business deals and charity events, as if he wasn't there. She watched him retreat to his room every night, building elaborate forts out of pillows and blankets, creating walls to keep the world out. On Friday, Ruby made her first move. "You like building things," she said, finding him in the garden where he was stacking rocks into precarious towers. Jonathan looked up, startled. The staff usually ignored him unless he was causing trouble. "They're not things," he said defensively. "They're fortresses." "Fortresses," Ruby repeated thoughtfully. "What are they protecting?" For a moment, Jonathan's guard slipped. "Everything," he whispered. Ruby knelt beside him, her knees protesting against the cold October ground. "You know," she said, "I used to build fortresses too. When I was your age." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "You're lying. Rich kids don't build fortresses." Ruby smiled, the first real smile anyone had seen from her since arriving. "Child, I grew up in a 2-room shack in Alabama with 7 brothers and sisters. The only thing rich about us was our imagination." And then she did something that shocked everyone watching from the mansion windows. She started helping him build. If stories like this move you the way they move me, then don't just watch, subscribe to Black Nation. Because we've got more untold stories waiting for you. For the first time in months, Jonathan Whitmore Jr. laughed. But Ruby's real work was just beginning. She discovered the truth the following Monday morning. Jonathan wasn't stupid. He wasn't defiant. He wasn't broken. He was dyslexic. The words on the page scrambled themselves like puzzle pieces that didn't fit. Numbers flipped and danced. Letters reversed themselves into hieroglyphics only he could see. But nobody had bothered to look deeper than his behavior. "The boy's lazy," his father declared during their weekly meeting. "Discipline is what he needs." "He needs structure," his mother added, though her words were slightly slurred from her morning pills. Ruby listened in silence from the hallway where she was dusting. That night, she knocked on Jonathan's door. "Want to try something different?" she asked. She pulled out a worn book from her suitcase. "The Adventures of Tom Sawyer." Jonathan groaned. "I can't read." "I told you. Who said anything about you reading?" Ruby settled into the chair beside his bed. "I'm going to read to you. But here's the thing. I want you to tell me what you see." "See. Close your eyes. Listen to my voice. And tell me what pictures form in your mind." For the next hour, Ruby read aloud while Jonathan painted vivid descriptions of Tom Sawyer's adventures. His vocabulary was sophisticated. His imagination boundless. His understanding of complex emotions and motivations was remarkable for a 12-year-old. "Jonathan," Ruby said softly when they finished the first chapter, "you're not stupid. Your brain just processes information differently. And that's not a curse, it's a gift." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Nobody ever told me that before." "Well," Ruby said, standing to leave, "I'm telling you now." But the Whitmore family wasn't ready to accept what Ruby saw in their son. 2 months later, everything exploded. It started with a phone call from Jonathan's latest school. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to withdraw Jonathan immediately," the headmaster said. Yesterday's incident was the final straw. Jonathan Sr. slammed down the phone and stormed into the living room where Ruby was helping Jonathan with his homework. "What did you do to him?" he roared at Ruby. "He was doing better, and now this?" Ruby remained calm, but Jonathan jumped up from the table. "It wasn't her fault," he shouted. "Tommy Henderson called her the N-word, and I punched him." The room went silent. Catherine Whitmore set down her gin and tonic with shaking hands. "Jonathan, we don't discuss such things." "Why not?" Jonathan's voice cracked with emotion. "Because it makes you uncomfortable? Miss Ruby is worth 10 of Tommy Henderson. She's the only person in this house who actually cares about me." That's when Jonathan Sr. lost control. "You will not speak to your mother that way. And you will not defend the help over your own family." The slap echoed through the marble hallway. But Ruby stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Whitmore, that child is hurting. Punishing him won't heal what's broken inside." Jonathan Sr. turned on her, his face twisted with rage. "How dare you tell me how to raise my son? You're nothing but a maid." He caught himself before saying the word, but it hung in the air like poison. Ruby straightened to her full height. "You're right, Mr. Whitmore. I am a maid. I clean your house, I wash your dishes, I iron your clothes. But I also hold a degree in education from one of the finest colleges in America. I've raised 4 children who are now doctors, teachers, and engineers. And in 2 months, I've done more for your son's education than 3 expensive schools managed in 3 years." She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "So yes, I'm just the help. But maybe that says more about you than it does about me." Jonathan Sr. was trembling with rage. "You're fired," he whispered. "Get out of my house. Now." And that's when Jonathan Jr. made the decision that would change everything. "If she goes, I go too." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine Whitmore started crying. Jonathan Sr. stood frozen, unsure how to respond to his 12-year-old son's ultimatum. Ruby knelt down to Jonathan's level. "Honey, this is your home. Your family. I can't let you." "You are my family," Jonathan said fiercely. "You're the only one who ever believed in me. We tell our stories for us by us. Subscribe to Black Nation, join the community, and let's make sure these voices are never silenced." What happened next would shock the entire Greenwich community and expose the depth of one family's dysfunction. Ruby Washington packed her 2 suitcases in silence. But as she walked toward the service entrance for the last time, something extraordinary happened. Jonathan Whitmore Jr. was waiting by the door, his own suitcase in hand. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "Jonathan, baby, you can't." "Yes, I can." His voice was steady, mature beyond his years. "You taught me that I'm not stupid. You taught me that I'm worth something. And you taught me that standing up for what's right is more important than being comfortable." Ruby's eyes filled with tears. Behind them, Catherine Whitmore appeared in the hallway, having followed them from the living room. "Jonathan, please," she whispered. "Don't go." For the first time in months, her voice was clear. Sober. Desperate. "Then stop her from leaving," Jonathan said simply. "Tell Dad he was wrong." Catherine looked at Ruby, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived. I can't." Jonathan nodded sadly. "Then you've made your choice." He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the door. That's when Catherine Whitmore did something that surprised everyone. She stepped in front of the door. "Ruby, we need you to stay." Ruby shook her head. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband made his feelings very clear." "My husband," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger, "is a fool." The words carried through the house like thunder. Jonathan Sr. appeared at the end of the hallway, having heard everything. "Catherine, what are you?" "Shut up, Jonathan." Catherine's transformation was remarkable. The pills, the floating detachment, the careful politeness, all of it stripped away to reveal a woman fighting for her son. "This woman has done more for our child in 2 months than we've done in 12 years. She's shown him kindness, respect, and genuine care. She's seen his potential when we only saw his problems." She turned to Ruby. "Please, I'm begging you, don't take him away from us. But more importantly, don't leave him." Ruby looked at Jonathan Jr., who was watching the scene with wide eyes. "What do you want, baby?" she asked him. Jonathan thought for a long moment. "I want to stay," he said finally. "But only if things change. Really change." And so began the most unusual arrangement in Greenwich, Connecticut history. Ruby Washington didn't just stay. She transformed the entire household. Within 6 months, Jonathan Jr. was reading at grade level using specialized techniques Ruby researched and implemented. She convinced his parents to have him tested, finally confirming his dyslexia and getting him the support he needed. But more than that, she changed how the Whitmore family saw themselves and each other. Jonathan Sr. was forced to confront his own prejudices when his son consistently chose Ruby's guidance over his own authority. Catherine entered rehab and began the long journey toward sobriety, motivated by the realization that she'd almost lost her son to her own indifference. And Jonathan Jr.? He flourished. Not just academically, but emotionally. He learned to advocate for himself, to stand up for others, and to see beyond the privileged bubble he'd been born into. Ruby stayed with the family for 6 more years, until Jonathan graduated high school with honors and left for college. But the story doesn't end there. Jonathan Whitmore Jr. grew up to become Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, one of the nation's leading advocates for learning disabilities. He established the Ruby Washington Foundation, which provides educational support and resources for children with learning differences, particularly in underserved communities. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Ruby walked into his life, he calls her. Because some lessons transcend classroom walls. Some teachers change more than test scores. And sometimes, the person who arrives to clean your house ends up cleaning your soul. Ruby Washington proved that true education isn't about degrees on walls or bank accounts. It's about seeing the potential in every child. It's about believing when others have given up. It's about understanding that intelligence comes in many forms, and worth isn't determined by wealth. She showed a privileged family that their greatest poverty wasn't in their bank account. It was in their hearts. And she reminded us all that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Legacies like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to Black Nation, and let's keep these stories alive together. Ruby Washington passed away in 2019 at the age of 85, surrounded by the 4 families she'd served as both maid and educator. At her funeral, Dr. Jonathan Whitmore delivered the eulogy. "Ruby didn't just work in our house," he said through tears. "She made it a home. She didn't just clean our floors, she swept away our ignorance. She didn't just take care of me, she saved me." Today, her photograph hangs in the Ruby Washington Foundation's headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. Below it, a simple plaque reads, "She saw potential where others saw problems. She offered hope where others offered judgment. She changed lives by refusing to accept that anyone was beyond saving." So the next time you hear someone dismiss the value of domestic workers, remember Ruby Washington. Remember that behind every uniform, every quiet presence in the background, there might be a graduate of Spelman College. There might be a mother who raised doctors and teachers while cleaning your bathrooms. There might be someone whose greatest qualification isn't listed on any resume: the ability to see worth in a throwaway child. Because in the end, Ruby Washington's story isn't just about a maid who changed a family. It's about the teachers walking among us, unrecognized and undervalued, carrying the power to transform lives with nothing more than patience, wisdom, and love. It's about the children we're too quick to label as failures, when they might just need someone to see their gifts differently. And it's about the reminder that real education happens not when we teach children to conform to our expectations, but when we learn to see the world through their eyes. Ruby Washington knew that every child has a fortress inside them. Some are built to keep the world out. But with the right person believing in you, those same walls can become the foundation for something beautiful, something lasting, something that changes everything. That's the power of one person who refuses to give up. That's the legacy of Ruby Washington. And that's a lesson worth remembering.